Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches, amantes del rock y del metal. Bienvenidos y bienvenidas a Conexión Rock Radio. Johnny González les saluda y como siempre les invitamos a que nos dejen su pulgar arriba y que disfruten de las entrevistas y de los invitados que tenemos para todos ustedes en nuestras entrevistas internacionales. Hoy en esta oportunidad tenemos a un interesante personaje procedente de Vancouver, Canadá, la tierra del maple, de la hoja de maple. Y le doy la más cordial de las bienvenidas al señor Devin Townsend, que aquí vamos a estar aquí conversando acerca de su nuevo trabajo. Devin, thank you so much for accepting this new interview for Conexión Rock Radio. For me, it's a big pleasure to share with the fans of your career around the world about the upcoming news you have in 2026, especially with the new album, Moth. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, brother.
Let's talk about this new album, Moth, that we appear for May 29 via InsideOut Music, and it described as something your career for over a decade. Why,
Yeah, man.
what finally made it feel like the right time to bring to life?
Well, we had an orchestra offer to perform it. And at that point, it went from an idea to something that had the potential of being real. And that was maybe about 5 years ago. Before that, I had spent the time going back to school, like learning about music theory and learning about orchestration. So it was a slow process, and I didn't think that we would even be able to do it until the orchestra came up and said, "We're willing." And at that point, all the engines started.
The album moves into the orchestral and choral territory, Devin, in a very deliberate way. What emotional ideas could only be expressed through the scale?
I think it's. I don't think that that it can only be expressed through that, but what I wanted to achieve was kind of a throwback to kind of like the Dark Ages, like Renaissance era, classical sort of look. And the orchestra is kind of synonymous with that sound. Like when you hear the orchestra, a lot of times it reminds me of that kind of old, orchestral type music. So what we were trying to achieve emotionally was a sense of oppression, like something ignorant in a sense. And it's a shame, but it seemed like that type of music really worked well with that type of statement, right?
Yes, it's a very curious thing about you mentioned in this answer, because you mentioned about learning harmony, counterpoint, and instrumentation from the ground up.
Yeah.
What was the most humbling part or that learning process, Devin?
I think there's not just one humbling part. I think the whole thing was humbling. Every morning I woke up, I was humbled by something different, right? Whether or not it was music or money or people or teams or conflict. It's like it was just doing the Moth was like going to college for me.
Hmm?
It was not something that I went into with an instruction book that I followed 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. It was just a whole bunch of papers, and I was like page 32 to 1 to 743 to 2, and it's like it was so confusing. But I will say that on a humbling level, the ability to have such incredible musicians be willing to play this music was incredibly humbling.
I must to say to you, the album had a lot of good highlights around the tracks, like example, Warrior Words, Enter the City, Lexing, A Proxy from God,
Yeah.
Orion, Hold a Night, Prepare for War, The Beatles Need, Silver Princess, Metamorphosis, and Let Go.
Yeah.
I want to know, from an artistic standpoint, do you consider the mod a challenge composing and recording 24 songs, singing all the all the ideas that you say in 10 years and give 10 a new face. Were the ideas different, or did you go decide to give all this material a new twist?
I think you have to be willing to follow where life goes. And who I was 10 years ago is very different than who I am now. Who I was 2 weeks ago is very different than who I am now. I mean, I'm sure it's the same in Honduras, but it's like life right now is just insane. So if I insisted that the vision stayed exactly like the person I was 10 years ago, I don't know if I would know how to do it. So a part of the process is accepting that my life has changed, and then as a result, maybe the music needs to change, or my relationships have changed, therefore the theme needs to be altered. Whatever it is you have to allow it to morph and shift. And as a result of that, it's different in some ways than the original idea, but the foundation for it, like the emotional component, like what it makes me feel, is the same. So how I achieved that changed, but what it is stayed the same.
At what point did the Moth stop feeling like a abstract vision, or start feeling like a real physical work you can't touch?
I think when the orchestra presented themselves to me, up to that point, I didn't think it was possible. So I would talk about it as if it was possible, but in my heart, perhaps I felt like it wasn't possible. So when the orchestra presented the opportunity, at that point, I was like, oh, this is possible. We can do this. And then the process shifted from dreaming to working.
If the Moth, the new album, were a physical place rated at an album, what kind of environment would it be? What role does silence or restraint play in a project defined by massive orchestration, Devin?
I would say that the physical environment that it would represent would be one of oppression. It would be like a dark world with a limit, like you cannot go past a certain limit. That's what it would be. And the place that silence, the way that silence plays into it, is the ending of the Moth is supposed to be silent in some sense to juxtapose the oppression of the first part. And the silence at the end is meant to represent that you can get out of the oppression.
About this new work appears a special guest, like example, Noord Nederlands Orkest, David Todd, Mike Kenley, James Leach, Anneke van Giersbergen, and of course, Aman Kosla. You work with orchestras and chorus across multiple countries around the world.
Yeah.
How do you keep and unify emotional identity across such a fragmented recording process?
Well, that's a great question. I think that the work that goes into keeping things a single organism so it doesn't get fragmented happens before you start recording. And I think a lot of that is relationships. Like, I think you can hire people that you don't know to do a job, and oftentimes it will work and there's no problems. You pay and then onward you go. But in order to create an environment where everybody is working towards the same goal, I think things that are very human come into play. Conflict resolution, interpersonal communication, being able to determine whether or not something is worth doing or is unhealthy for you on a personal level. All these things are determined way before we do any recording. So once we do record, it's like everybody knows what to do. It's like the marching orders are already established. And so anytime we do run into a conflict when we're recording, we basically have already learned how to deal with that. I'm very fortunate that many of the people that I work with, I've been working with for years. So we have relationships. When things get as much pressure as the Moth was, when things get as intense as they are, if you haven't done the work on a personal level to know whether or not you can rely on people, or if people know whether or not they can rely on me, if you haven't done that, man, things can get so much more complicated. But if you've done that before, you're sort of going in it as a fist as opposed to a slap, right? And I think that the work that we all put in as a team prior to recording a single note on our personal relationships defined our ability to get through the hard sections.
Was there a single musical moment in the album that you made you stop and thinking, this is exactly what I hear in my head?
I think there was a lot of those, but it's part of making a record. I think is you look for those moments, you pursue those moments, and you do the work so that you can get those moments and say, yes, this is correct. You had asked earlier what the difference between something of this size, the scale of the Moth is versus, maybe another record. And the answer to that as well is that there is no difference. It's just this one's bigger, It's like the process that I go through when I'm writing music. It doesn't matter if it's Dream Piece or Ziltoid or the Moth or Strapping or Synkestra or the Hummer. It's all the same process. Just some of them require orchestras and choirs and some of them don't. Right?
The metaphor or metamorphosis is the central point of this concept for this new work. What does the transformation mean to you in the personal aspect in this stage of your life?
I think it's different than what I expected. When I was thinking of transformation when I was younger, I thought it was going to be a profound moment, like everything has changed. But although everything changed, it was not a big thing. It was like a small thing, and it came down to the fact that I realized that for much of my life I've been at war with myself.
Mm-hmm.
When I recognized that war with myself was counterproductive, and that I was not allowing myself to be complete because I was disallowing a certain part of my personality to have a voice, either because I thought I was a bad person or whatever the reasons were, I wasn't complete in a sense. But by going through trauma, which we did go through, and there was no choice but to confront your fear, then everything changed, and it became a different type of confidence for me, and it became a different type of gratitude, because all of a sudden it stopped being a war and became a journey. And the journey is one that's difficult sometimes, but ultimately very beautiful. So I don't see it as as a burden now. I see it as a journey that's you just need to surrender to, and it just kind of changed my perspective on it all. It's the same as it was, but I just feel a different connection to it. I feel a different connection to myself, right?
You say that this project is less about the spectacle and more about truth. What does truth in music mean to you now?
Saying what I feel like saying, regardless of whether or not other people think it's cool. For real. Because, and I would also say one thing to add to our conversation is I'm also getting older, and this is a lot to do with just getting older, right? But when I was younger, if I had an idea that I thought was interesting, but I thought, oh, that's too weird, Other people are going to think it's strange. That's not cool. It doesn't fit into the scene or whatever. When I was younger, maybe subconsciously, I was more willing to say no to a project because of that, my ego.
Mm-hmm.
But now, either because I'm older or I just don't care, whatever, now I'm like, oh, I do what I feel like doing. So the constant for me now, uh, beyond everything, is whether or not it means something to me.
Okay, I had a personal question about this new work, Devin. Were there moments where the scale of the project became overwhelming enough that you questioning continuing it?
I would say every day. I would say every day there was a moment, especially Mondays. Like, so, like everybody would go crazy, working. We'd take like Saturday, Sunday off just to kind of be like, oh shit, let's just take a breath. And then Monday, you get back, and then you get emails that you have no money, or somebody's angry at you, or this thing fell through, or somebody's sick, or somebody passed away, or um, there's a fight with somebody, or somebody's suing somebody else, or whatever. And on Mondays, after a couple of days of just like trying to decompress, I'd be like, this is not gonna work. So after a while, I started recognizing that when I felt that this is not going to work, I'd be like, "Oh, it's Monday." So it's less about the project and more about the Monday, right?
Thank you so much for this point, Devin. It's very curious and very funny about the Mondays.
Yeah.
Hey, the album deals heavily with self-acceptance and confronting discomfort. How did you create in it, affecting your own relationship with fear and vulnerability?
I think it was against my will
Mhm.
because when we say this, it can very easily, I think, be come across like I had the intent to do that. Like that was my reason. I'm going to do this, but that I'm afraid is not the case.
Mhm.
The case was more I just found myself in a place in life that I didn't expect. Kids had moved out, partner had moved out, ran out of money, was burnt out from touring, and I felt so depressed, man. Like I was just so lost that um, the energy that I used to have to say I'm not thinking about those things was gone. So all of a sudden I was just like, okay. And then it just kind of, you just, depression or trauma or loss or whatever it was,
Mhm.
you just eventually, it's like there's no choice but to sort of confront it. So it wasn't with bravery, it was just circumstance, right?
Okay, about this point in your musical career, the next year marks your 30th anniversary in the music industry. For those you follow your career, there are many people around the world who have followed you in many projects and your current solo project, of course. There any chance that we made some reissues of your previous project, your previous projects in vinyl, Devin?
Maybe. I think I mean, ultimately the answer is probably yes. But until such time that I get everything now organized, it's a later problem. You know what I mean? So some people, when they're eating their food, um, put it all into a pile and eat it all together, right? But for me, I go like, okay, I eat the salmon, and then I eat the salad, and then I eat the rice, right? So the way that I kind of keep my mind reasonably organized is one thing at a time. And right now, there's so many moving parts in my life that I'm focused on that.
Mhm.
And in the future, who knows? But never say never, right?
Now what the mod is complete, what part of yourself do you feel has changed the most compared when you began it in your life?
I don't take shit anymore. For real. There
Oh,
was a time there where I felt like much of my nature was that about making sure everybody was happy around me, people pleasing, people pleasing, people pleasing. But through this, I recognize that people pleasing is indicative of a certain type of problems in my past. And now, if something doesn't work for me, if there's something that doesn't make sense for the music or my life or my personal life or my family or me, then the answer is no. It's no longer do I feel any desire to try and appease people who don't have my best interests at heart. So um, I think the confidence to do and say and stand up for what it is that's important to me now has certainly changed. And now I don't take shit.
if someone hears the Moth with no context of your previous work, what feeling do you hope stays within it the longest?
I think that the whole idea of the Moth is like an audio cinema. So you listen to it in headphones and paint pictures. The experience of listening to it from beginning to end can be overwhelming, I think. Um, and the overwhelming feeling is meant to represent pushing through a boundary. So if there are people who choose to listen to the Moth that are like me, working to push through, to get to another place, to not allow the negativity to tear us down, to not allow the traumas from the past to define our future, then by the end of the record, I hope that people feel that sense of closure, I guess.
Okay, Devin, what message do you want to send for all the people that enjoyed this interview? And again, thank you so much for your time for making possible this interview. I'm sending to you my best wishes now,
Thank you.
but it's now releasing for the world.
I would say that my message to anybody listening to this is drink more water.
More coffee.
Well, you got to mix the two. I think that I find I rarely drink enough water, so I've been trying to drink more water. So, you
Okay.
know, all of us drink more water. If you're fortunate enough to still have your parents around, call them.
Ok, damas y caballeros, pues ustedes han escuchado esta amena entrevista con el señor Devin Townsend y les invitamos a que compren su nuevo trabajo llamado The Moth, ya sea en formato físico, formato vinilo, CD o también en plataforma para que lo puedan disfrutar en cualquier parte del mundo. Soy Johnny González, estas fueron las entrevistas internacionales en Conexión Rock Radio, pendientes de la próxima de nuestra serie y como siempre les decimos a todos ustedes en cualquier parte del mundo, que el rock y el metal no falten siempre en su dieta diaria. Que la pasen muy bien.